to the Game Dev Local podcast. I am your host, Laura Donohue, and I'm here today with Dr. Mark Brady, and we're going to be talking about UX research, and specifically games research. Just to tell you a little bit about Mark, he has 2 decades of experience working in user research, spanning in Europe, US, and Asia. And his gaming client list is he's worked on all sorts of different games from all sorts of different platforms, PC, console, you name it, he's probably worked on it. And Mark's early gaming experiences include playing Elite and Double Dragon in the 80s, and he's also spent too many hours to recall playing GoldenEye against his friends in N64. Mark holds a PhD in sociology, a master's degree in UX, and an undergraduate degree in cognitive science. Mark!
Thank you very much.
He's also my manager, and he's wonderful, a wonderful human. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on the podcast.
Thank you for such a great introduction. That's fantastic. Yeah, like going back to my my childhood there and thinking about all those games I used to play on my.
Yeah, I imagined you also have a PhD in GoldenEye then.
That wouldn't have been nice. That would have been lovely to have done that. Yes. Yeah, I don't think that was an option at the time, but lots of fun times playing those games. Yeah,
nice.
yeah. The Spectrum, I think, was the first computer that I had when I was growing up. And I was probably like 5 or 6, so it's going back quite a few years now. But yeah, very early start playing games, and then managed to convince my parents to upgrade to an Amiga at the time.
Ooh.
So got right into that and playing like Lemmings and those sorts of things, and then really got into kind of all the space and flight simulators and all those sorts of things, which was fantastic fun. And then obviously consoles and the rest is history. And nowadays I've got a daughter who takes up most of my time, so kind of beginning to play a few games with her, but it's kind of mostly sort of casual games on the phone these days, unfortunately.
What are some of your favorite games? And she's 7,
She's 7,
right?
yes, yeah. So she's kind of into Cooking Mama and those sorts of games, which she kind of enjoys playing, and a little bit of Monument Valley, which she kind of enjoys playing those sorts of games, which is amazing because there's some quite intricate thinking you have to do with that, kind of outside the normal.
Yeah, that's like a
physics.
Puzzle game, and like changing perspective.
Yeah,
and stuff,
it's pretty amazing, sort of seeing how she thinks and sort of just gliding through those levels, which is really nice to see. And it's kind of especially as a psychologist as well, and having that kind of human behaviour background, it's actually quite interesting to sort of think or see how someone else is thinking. Who has a different way of thinking to yourself. It's always quite fun doing that. So it's been quite interesting watching her play those sorts of games. For me, I guess I'm kind of mostly playing. Kind of the most hardcore game I'm playing these days is kind of PUBG, but I play that on my iPad, so it's not quite kind of the same, but hey, it's good fun, quite enjoy it.
Yeah, I've never played those kinds of games on like a iPad. I can't imagine what it must be from a UX point of view, I guess, like how I would like aim or move around like on an iPad versus something that feels very comfortable and natural to me, like playing with a keyboard and mouse.
Yeah, it wasn't as bad. I kind of had the same thought as well, and I think when I first downloaded it, I hadn't really ever done that with the kind of the D-pads on an iPad screen before. I hadn't really sort of done that much, and I downloaded it not expecting very much.
Mm-hmm.
And actually it's surprisingly natural how it sort of feels, and I think obviously you've got that kind of console experience of using game controllers, so
has a similar gamepad experience then.
Exactly, yeah, and it's actually quite nice as well because you have all of the a lot more controls than you would ever get on a game controller on a console, because obviously you've got the whole screen to choose from. You see touch screen, so it's actually you almost have a little bit more flexibility playing those sorts of games, which is quite fun. So it kind of works. It hits my fix anyway, so it's all good.
Hey, whenever we can get that in our very busy lives, particularly as a parent, that's not
That's it.
Yeah. I'm a parent of 2 cats, which does keep me very occupied, but probably not the same level as a 7-year-old. So.
What are you playing? What are you playing these days?
These days, well, I picked up Dead Cells quite recently, which is hard. It's like not easy.
Yeah, I
guess they call it a road.
phone,
They call it a roguelike for a reason, don't they? But it's really cool, and I like how like I really like am drawn to games that have like well, I guess lots of people are in like interesting like mechanics and like gameplay and things like that, and then instead of like front loading a bunch of like lore and narrative on you, it's just kind of like sprinkled in. Like in the loading screen, it's like they used to keep watch on the tower, and then it was too late. And it's like, what do you mean it was too late? Like, oh, they're like zombies that are like trying to eat my face. Like, you know, so you're like kind of like learning the story, like
you're picking it up as you go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there was another game that oh my god, I literally just brought it up. My husband just bought it, but like you're these like little shipmates like going down like in the ocean, and like there are these like bugs and like mutant frogs that are like trying to sink your ship.
Wow. Okay.
And it's like really fast paced and like extremely chaotic, and we're like shouting at each other like as we're playing it in a very fun way.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like quite different with like Dead Cells and like very focused and like silent, and then this is like chaos, we're thinking on water. So
I do love that though now and especially I think because I'm playing more kind of casual games I guess as well now that it feels like there's a lot more variation there, so I can actually choose games to suit my mood a lot more now. So like you saying that was a fast-paced game, like I can choose that if I want to kind of get that kind of excitement. But then if I'm kind of in a more calm or sort of contemplative mood, I can sort of play more thoughtful games that aren't perhaps against the clock, those sorts of things. I like having that kind of choice now.
Yeah, there's a lot of and thinking about, we're going to kind of be talking about, user research and UX experience, and, that goes into kind of like a lot of different things, like evaluating UI and like the experience of like actually playing a game. But then you also think about, the context in which people are playing games and how that actually has a big influence in terms of people's like the kind of like satisfaction they get from playing, because they might be feeling like, oh, well, I'm kind of tired. Maybe I don't have a lot of time. I'll pick this up. Or, okay, I have like more time over the weekend. I'm going to dig into like Horizon Forbidden West or something like that.
Yeah. I think it's a big part of game design as well. And I think it's, you talked about story earlier on, and that's kind of one of those elements where if you have a game that has a deep and compelling story that you want to get users involved in, and often quite early on, right? You want to kind of get them engaged as quick as possible. But at the same time, you've got to counteract that, especially on the more, I guess, the casual game side of things. Do people have that kind of amount of time? Are they going to be spending their first hour playing the game, or are they only going to have half an hour to play the game because they've got other commitments that are going on, those sorts of things? So just making sure that kind of you can engage people, but in ways that suits their environment and their kind of situation. And again with casual games, if you're on the bus, is that a different experience compared to if you need to quickly pause the game because you need to get off your stop or whatever it is. All those sorts of things you have to sort of think about now.
Yeah, it really does impact the way people play and consume media, and this actually, I think this feeds into really into this topic really nicely, which is like what drew you into games research?
What drew me into games research? Well, I guess I was always into research, right? So kind of from kind of my early education, and you mentioned cognitive science and that sort of thing. So I was always interested in the kind of, I guess, the way that human behaviour and human psychology meshes with computers and devices and machines and those sorts of things. So I was always been kind of quite interested in those sorts of things. So I kind of, I guess, wound my way into that. Found myself doing a lot of user research, so not necessarily with computer games, but more with kind of apps and websites and TV interfaces and those sorts of things. So I was kind of doing a lot of that where I was actually looking at, let's figure out, can this person come into this interface, understand it, and pick it up very quickly. And if not, what can we change and design about it? But it was very much kind of transactional type thought. So it was like it's a banking app, so I need to go in and find out what my balance is very quickly, and then go out, and that's all I'm interested in. It wasn't really about enjoyment necessarily. It was just very, very transactional.
Which is fine. You don't necessarily need to gamify checking your checking account to make sure you can, withdraw money from the ATM.
Exactly. And people aren't interested in that. They just want to get in and out as quick as they can.
Yeah.
And then I think I was working in an agency at the time, and we were doing some various projects, and I think we started to get more interest, I think, from gaming clients, and we started to think actually maybe this is an area we want to kind of explore a lot more, and it turned out that it was actually quite a good area for us to go into. So I guess it kind of came out that way, and obviously it always had an interest in games. So I think if you're working in the game industry, you kind of need to know games, and you need to know that mindset and that way of thinking. So I think that helps, but yeah, really it was just kind of very kind of, I guess, organic kind of way of getting into it. So yeah, we just started doing some projects for some relatively small gaming clients to begin with, and then it kind of got up to the kind of the bigger publishers of the world. So we started doing stuff in their labs at certain times. We'd actually go into their labs and we'd be doing 10-person game tests over several days, really, really involved stuff, and really getting to see how a game changes and evolves over its development cycle as well, which is really interesting. Seeing how people take that feedback that we gave them, how developers take that feedback we gave them, and then they can action it and turn it into the amazing game it ends up in.
So you've actually been able to witness your results be put into action.
Yeah. Which is, for me, that's the kick. That's the bit that I love about this type of work. Really, it's where you kind of actually provide some feedback to someone who then is able to use that and work magic with it, and actually create something. And they're learning a lesson. They're on that journey with you, and they're learning a lesson of how to fine tune and improve the game. And then. And then when you see it launched and published, and it's people, from maybe day one when you started doing testing on it, and it was a vertical slice of a kind of functional but not fully fleshed out game. Understandably, that was where it had to be at that time, and then you get the feedback, and it's like, they really struggled with this, or the difficulty gradient wasn't quite what it needed to be, and then however long it is down the line, once it's actually released and published and it's getting rave reviews, that's amazing. And you're not responsible for that, but if you're even just the tiniest, smallest part of how it got on that to that point, it's fantastic. And I think a lot of there's so much passion in the games industry for the games, and everyone who works on it is so passionate about it that you can't sort of help to feel like you're sort of part of that team as well, and it's very infectious.
Yeah, it definitely is. That's something that I felt when I've worked with games clients since being here for almost 3 years now, is just feeling just innately saying when we're working on this or something, I'm like, oh, I'm actually not necessarily obviously not your employee,
in the same company,
but I'm so invested in your vision that it is now and of course we feel that way with all of our clients, and we're all very invested in everyone's success. But I guess there's just this personal my identity is being just fulfilled and seen, and I'm able to make that productive and contribute to something that is going to be enjoyed by hopefully millions of people.
I think that's it. It's amazing. I mean, we've been very lucky, I think, in previous years where we've worked with some of the bigger publishers. And you really do get that feeling, and then to the point where once the game's actually launched, you actually, you're still in contact with the team that you were working with, and they might send you a copy of the game. You might find that they put your name in the credits list, which is amazing, and really, I'm so honored. That's so cool.
Yeah.
An extra incentive to get the game and finish it, so you get to the credits list at the end. But yeah, it really does feel like it's just a big sort of nice team effort.
And again, seeing that progress, I know like early on before coming to the labs, I helped like quite a few friends like with small studios and things like that, like put out their games. And one of them in particular was made by like my all-time bestest friend, Kat Small. Look her up; she's doing amazing things. And she made a game called Breakup Squad, where you're at a party with your friends, and there's a couple there, and they're like they're like a really toxic relationship, and you're trying to like keep them away from each other at the party so that they don't like bring the house down with their drama, and like seeing that like being play tested and like getting people's feedback, and like watching like her and her team like grow and like implement those findings, and then like the game has been featured. It was at Now Play This last year at Somerset House, and it was actually also I can't remember, but I think it was at the Victoria and Albert Museum as well. They had a video games. One of those
sort of showcase.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like one of those special exhibits. And
Yeah.
I was just like, I helped.
Yeah, you can't help get a feeling
like,
of pride for it.
It was really cool.
It's amazing. And yeah, I mean, what a cool concept that probably, again, like back when I was gaming in the 80s, would never have been a concept for a game, right? It was just not something that anyone would have really thought about. So I love the fact that now there's so much variety, so many different ways of expressing the art, which it is, right? It's an art.
And then like measuring. So how do we measure that? Like because like we do, like our specialty is like qualitative research, right? So we're like talking, we're watching people play the game usually, and then asking for their feedback afterwards, and like crafting, questions to kind of like elicit, feedback that's going to be productive for the development team. But like how do you think of like questions or like planned studies to, really get at the heart of, those like experiences?
I think it all starts with that, first meeting with the client, where you want to understand what, as much as you can about the game, what's the game trying to achieve, what are they trying to achieve, and then very specifically, what are the kind of challenges that they want to try and get to the bottom of for this particular playtest. And they usually will have that pretty well documented, but it might be a bit of a discussion we'll have to be able to get it in the format that we need it. But yeah, understanding from the team what it is that they want is kind of first and foremost. But I mean, pretty typically that'll end up being some form of playtest. So it will be, normally the format is that we'll get a group of people together, we'll actually recruit them. So we'll agree with the developer exactly what is the profile that we want. So maybe that's existing gamers of the franchise or whatever it is, or people that play that very specific type of game, or that genre. But it could also include in that mix people that haven't bought the game that maybe want to buy the game and might be. You don't want to be excluding people that might actually be interested in the game once it's published. So just trying to get the right mix, recruiting those people in, and then we'll just get them into the room, as you say, and usually we'll sort of have a little bit of an introduction with them. We'll make, perhaps depending on where the game is, maybe we need to do the tutorial to some extent and get them, just teach them the basics so that they're not kind of just, thrown in without really any understanding. And then really just put them in front of the game and just let them play and just kind of get into it as much as possible. And then it's really on us to do all the observations. So for us, it's really just kind of understanding as much as possible patterns that are coming out of those playtests. So if it's, it could be we have multiple people in the room at once, or it might be just a one-on-one. We're just doing a series of one-on-ones over a few days. But you just want to try and unpick where are people getting stuck, where are they, having confusion, where's kind of the fun level dropping significantly. If they are getting frustrated, is it a good frustration? Mm-hmm. Is it a bad frustration? Because sometimes you want the player to be frustrated, right? You
don't want to just press a button and be like, I win.
Exactly. It's got to be that right level of challenge, and actually increasing that challenge as you go on, because you don't want it to be just as easy at the beginning as it is at the end, right? You want it to feel like it's increasing and keep that engagement going. Just all of those sorts of things. But typically, I'd say kind of the magic word for us is patterns. That's what we're always looking for. Is where are we seeing an issue coming up more than once for one specific person? You know, it has to be something that's sort of repeatable as much as possible. Rarely, but sometimes you might find something that comes up that is, it might only be one or two people that experience it, but just from our own experience of working in the industry and doing this kind of work for so long, we kind of go, actually, you know, even though it was only a small percentage of people, it was a big enough thing that we feel like that's going to have quite a big impact if we did launch it. You know, we'll tend to test with maybe, I don't know, it could be like 10 people, for example, 10 or 15 people. And if one or two of them experience something, and we go, actually, do you know what, if you launch that and you launch it to like, you know, millions of people, 1 to 2 out of 10 translates to quite a few number of people when it's millions. So we just need to sort of think about that a little bit and just sort of make sure that you know, that we're reporting the right thing, we're giving it the right credence when we're talking back to the developers and saying that, you know, either this is a small issue which we really think will kind of, you know, clear up in time, or it's something that's kind of really quite major that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, it really is a balance, isn't it? You know, trying to, and always going back to, like you were saying before, like what are the objectives of the study? Yeah. And really making sure that, you know, whatever we're delivering is actionable and relates to, you know, the scope of the work.
Yes.
So it's all well and good to say like, oh yeah, just add like 500, like players want more variety, so add 500 more levels. Like we wouldn't necessarily make a recommendation like that. No. You know, or even be as vague to say players want more variety, because it's like, what does that mean? You know, variety of movesets, items, you know, scenery, like, you know, they're all like, you really want to dig in to make sure that you know, like, okay, this is like really the quandaries that the team are having, and, you know, and that kind of guides the conversation. And then as well as what you're observing as well.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. And, yeah, you mentioned that we're a qualitative first agency, and that's definitely, I guess, our strength. But we, you know, we'll often supplement that stuff with surveys and with kind of other measures that can be more sort of quantified.
We've used eye tracking in the past, for
tracking,
example.
Lots of different other ways of kind of adding, you know, vigor and robustness to some of the findings that we're reporting as well, which I think is important to do. And yeah, and it's potentially answering slightly different questions in different ways as well. So there's kind of another value to doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, and even tracking, you know, for our latest study, we were tracking controller presses as well, and we were able to really like zoom in and like show the client that, you know, people were mixing up some of the controls, and they weren't sure, you know, like why they failed a task, for example, because they didn't realize that they were pressing the wrong buttons. And so like really being able to like zoom in on that and be like, okay, this is like exactly what's going on, you know, which does then require a keen eye, and you're following, you know, typically we run these play tests like 4 people simultaneously. So each researcher has, you know, you have 2 researchers watching like 2 players at once, which is also a lot of fun because, you know, we'll be like, you know, oh no, go that way, go that way. Oh, you're so close, you can do it. Like we get really excited.
Yeah.
Like cheer, but silently.
But with, you know, scientific distance.
Yes, it's all very in the name of science. For sure, absolutely. And actually, I failed to mention this in the beginning. We're actually filming in our offices and in our labs, and this is we haven't run a play testing session here. We usually run them in we have bigger rooms throughout the labs with cameras and stuff.
The next couple of floors up.
But this is our sweet shop. Because the building used to be like a banana warehouse.
So the main lab, used to be a banana warehouse, because we're based in Covent Garden in London. So the main building back when Covent Garden was a market and had a proper market. This used to be where the bananas got imported and then would be sold on in the market. But this specific room kind of joins on to the side of the building, And we've been told that this actually used to be a sweet shop back in the day. So yeah, you would have had your shelves of rhubarb and candies all at the back, those sorts of things. And
we do have offering over there loads of jelly beans and things like that.
Keep the theme up as much as we can. So yeah, but this room has been repurposed multiple times. To be honest with you, it's been used for meeting rooms. We've used it as kind of rooms to run sprints for sort of designing things. We kind of try and keep our rooms as flexible as possible when we're kind of designing them, so you can bring furniture in and out. So that's why we've got whiteboards on pretty much all of our rooms, so that there's always places to capture your thoughts and your ideas and your post-it notes, those sorts of things.
Yeah, the rooms are pretty flexible because one day, like the warehouse, you'll have boardroom table, chairs all around, whiteboards, for 50 people or whatever, and then the next day it's we have 10 computers set up, all streaming live, at 1080p.
Connected to Steam or whatever it is. Yeah. So yeah, it's very different. We've run, that room, we've run, dinner evenings even in that room before, and all sorts of things. So they're very, very flexible setups.
That actually leads me to my next question, which is, so we've run all sorts of games research here. What are some of the fun or more creative kind of games or methods that you've used in the past?
I guess, I remember a few years ago now we ran some playtesting for a really fun karaoke game. It was a console-based karaoke game that we worked on, and we literally got people. We were just trying to think, what's the best way to kind of simulate this game as much as possible, and understanding kind of the audience. You kind of think, a lot of the time it's probably not necessarily going to be one person sat in the room on their own singing away to the console. It probably is a significant number of people do that, but also
there is that TV show with the red panda, I can't remember. I'm going to pronounce this wrong. Anyway, there's a red panda that sings karaoke on her own in rage mode. But this isn't it.
I don't think this is encouraging rage mode. But the objective of the game was much more about the kind of trying to encourage the party atmosphere. That was kind of one of the key remits. And again, going back to sort of understanding what the developers wanted out of it. So that was kind of the key sort of thing that they were interested in doing. And so we were like, well, let's just get groups of friends in. So we kind of recruited people who were actually groups of friends who were interested in karaoke and went to karaoke nights. So, we highlighted there were specific venues that we said we wanted people to have gone to and had experience going to. So they really were kind of into serious karaoke. And we recruited them, we got them into our lab. So we literally had and then we were kind of like, well, let's provide all of the things that they would typically do if they got together as a group of friends and went out. So we gave them a bit of the choice. If they wanted to drink, they could drink as well. So that was all kind of laid out for them as well if they wanted to. We weren't encouraging it, but it was there if they wanted to, just to try again.
Simulate the natural karaoke environment.
It is about, and it sounds crazy, but it is about that, right? You want to kind of understand the game in the environment that it's going to be played in as much as possible, and that was what this was about, was trying to get that natural kind of natural sense. And so we did. We got these groups of people coming in, and they all knew each other. So kind of you didn't have to break the ice with anyone. It was quite nice like that. And you could kind of, what's always nice about doing testing, we've done it before with TV and those sorts of things, is getting not just one person to come in to test something, but getting groups of friends that know each other, or family members who know each other, and actually watching them figure out a game as they're playing it. And you learn so much from that, because you're hearing those conversations. If you've got one person around, they're not having a conversation with themselves about what's going on, it's all happening in their head. Whereas this way, you're actually hearing what they want to talk about or what they're trying to figure out as they're talking with each other. So we got to experience all of that. You get to see the fun moments much more visibly as well, because they're kind of laughing amongst each other and we're relaxed with each other because they know each other. So you're getting to see all of those moments come out really nicely. And equally, if they really don't figure, not sure what's going on with something, or they kind of no idea what's going on, they'll talk about that. They'll say that to people. They'll be like, what the hell's that thing over there? And they'll all try and figure it out, and they'll make crazy guesses about what it is, which is all part of the fun as well. And oftentimes wrong, and the wrong ones are the fun ones.
It's this.
Yeah. What's the dancing frog in the corner mean? We don't know.
But you need to let them, and I think that's something that, especially like if you're either like newer in game development or even like veterans, like it's really hard to watch something that you've worked on be used by someone who doesn't know fully how to use it, and to like stumble through it. So you just want to be, this is how you just want to like, of course we want to help. Like we don't like watching people, I don't know, for lack of a better word, suffer.
But I mean, that is part of it, and it's a very real reason why we tend to have the one-way mirror in our labs, because they're soundproofed. And again, for those exact same reasons, what we don't want is for people to be the developers, to be telling them what it is that you do. We want to see, can they figure it out themselves? Is this something that they can figure out in 10, 15 seconds of a little bit of thought, or is it something that an hour later they still have no idea what it's about? That's really interesting data, and we need to be able to sort of not tell them, so that we can sort of figure that out in real time.
Because that's going to be that's the goal, right? Of having them be able to use it on their own without extra help. Or if they do seek it out, it's kind of like in a fun social way. Like I know people like might make YouTube videos about how to, secret seek and find in games, or, or optimizations or things like that. But, you want your menus and your onboarding experience, for the most part, to be as easy and accessible, especially for a karaoke game.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You don't want it to be hard work. So you just want to get into, you're right. If it's a karaoke, I mean, and again, that goes down to the mindset of the gamer. So if it's a gamer who loves story, and really wants the narrative of the game to unfold as they're playing it, then that early stuff can actually be strung out a little bit more, right? Because that's the bit that they enjoy. But if you're a hardcore karaoke singer and you just want to get singing as soon as you possibly can, then that's what you need to do. And so you need to shorten that kind of onboarding process. So it's a lot about understanding the player and your audience.
Right, and making sure that whatever design decisions or vision that you have for your game is being communicated and understood in the way that's intended.
Yes.
Having that intention is really, really important. And, seeing people, like for example, like Elden Ring, extremely difficult game, like no hand-holding. As soon as I open the door and walk into the field, it's like beautiful, gorgeous, mystical, amazing, and then like all of a sudden like I'm decapitated by the guy on the horse, and I'm just like, what? But that's the fun, that's part of it. And then you start to learn like, okay, there are like zones that I can go level up in, and then there are other zones that I need to like get a few levels first.
Yeah.
And again, like that was what was intended by the studio, by FromSoft, and that was something that I was able to kind of like pick up like a little bit on my own, a little bit from friends, and that was like enough of like a cue to be like, okay, this is like how I'm supposed to play the game, and it's fun,
And I think that's exactly where the difference lies between when we do testing for products, and sort of banking apps and those sorts of things, and again, the gaming stuff, you kind of want it to be difficult, right? But it has to be the right period of difficult. With the banking app, go in, get your balance, go out. With the gaming stuff, you want them to experience that kind of thrill from figuring out a difficult thing, and that's where the enjoyment comes from. But it can't be too difficult, otherwise they'll never get to that thrill. So that kind of constant like fine tuning and feedback, I think, is really kind of where a lot of what we do comes in.
And making sure you recruit the right people.
Yeah.
If you recruited people who never go to karaoke, then that would probably be a very different experience then. And then would they even be interested in buying such a game? Probably not. And it's good to kind of like expand the bounds a little bit. So maybe people who enjoy singing but don't necessarily go to karaoke, like, is that an audience that you may want to try to expand to, for example, and that's totally fine. But like understanding, like who your core audience is and making sure you're getting like the right data from the right people.
Yeah, and kind of their background knowledge makes a difference as well. So, for example, with the karaoke thing, if you've got hardcore karaoke goers and there are certain conventions that they have and certain language that they use within that community, if you might want to think about, do we want to reflect that in a game and make use of that, but not to the point where you're then excluding newcomers who don't understand those conventions and that language, and then they can't get on board with your game. So just trying to figure out ways and means to kind of appeal to one audience, but also not exclude another audience. So that's again another, I keep talking about balance, and I think that is a lot of what we have to do. It's kind of, balancing all these different sort of things, lots of spinning plates that we have to kind of make sure that work for everyone.
Were there any noise complaints from the karaoke?
No. Thankfully, we didn't have any residents nearby when we were testing that one. But there was lots of raucousness, and especially I think towards we were sort of, with that I think we were sort of testing more towards afternoon into the evening. So by that point, you sort of got people that were kind of finished their work and they're kind of coming in, they're ready to go for their night out. So I think I seem to remember the last group that we had. They'd really tucked into the to the treats that we'd supplied, and I think they were planning on going out afterwards. I think they invited us out afterwards as well, and it was very good fun. But yeah, really nice to see. Really nice to see. It makes things a lot more enjoyable. Yeah,
I bet. Oh man, yeah, that sounds like an absolute blast. I'm so sad.
Yeah, that was a great one. Yeah, but I think anything like that, anything where it's kind of multiple people playing together, I think it's really lovely seeing that kind of social dynamic. I think it's a big part of gaming, right? The social side of it. Even if you're not playing together at the same time, it's like just talking about games afterwards and that kind of stuff. It's really nice to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you do end up seeing even like the playtesting. We're doing like a single player game. You have the afterwards, like the participants kind of like chatting to each other and like talking about all the other games that they're playing, and it is just like this like social glue that brings a lot of people together, and which is also just another really great byproduct of being a researcher and observing that and seeing how the experience of the game goes beyond the game itself.
Yeah, it's really nice. And I mean, we've had it before where might be other tests that we do where you're actually testing the same game over with the same people over multiple days, right? Because you want to kind of understand the whole experience of the game, and you can't expect people to, sit through an hour playtesting and we'll get the full feedback. You need to play it start to finish, so we'll get them coming back day after day after day to finish the game. And in those situations, you really get to see people kind of forming friendships almost. It's quite nice because you do get that kind of conversation, and we'll have breaks, and then they'll get to chat.
Look at us, Sutherland Labs, friendship
bringing people
creators.
together. Bringing people together. Look at that.
Oh, that's what we're all about.
But no, it is lovely. Yeah. It is nice. It shows the power of games, I think.
So these kind of like multi-day, I'm hearing like multi-day playtests, like recruiting groups of friends. I mean, there are kind of some overlaps in terms of traditional research. Like, for example, you might we've run numerous like diary studies to test out, new features for an app and recruited like friendship groups to use like particular the different social features like together to try to simulate, what it might look like, if this was actually launched, for example, or testing something like over time. So there is some kind of overlap between like games research and like traditional like UX research. But would you say like there are some key differences between like planning a games research study or just like being a games researcher, like, anything that people might need to know that is like slightly different from traditional UX?
I mean, there's probably quite a few actually. I mean, it does feel like it's a very different way of getting that kind of data, and I think, everything from just the type of testing you do. Games testing much more tends to be what we would call evaluative testing. So you're taking something that's been built and testing that, if it's a vertical slice or an early build of the game, and testing that. Whereas with more kind of traditional user research, you might be doing that, but there's also a good portion of that where you're actually doing what we call the discovery type of research, where you're kind of understanding more about the audience and trying to figure out what it is you should be building before you actually built it. So there's a lot of that work that we tend to do in the more kind of non-gaming type stuff. So gaming tends to be much more about evaluating something that's already been built. I would argue actually that it would be interesting to do more of the discovery stuff in gaming. I think that there's still probably a need for that, but probably melds a little bit more into what's currently done by market research to some extent within gaming research or within gaming industry rather. And then I think things like the audiences that you have to recruit are kind of different in the sense that you need to know a lot more about games and the types of games that people play. That's kind of a much bigger part of it. And differences between hardcore gamers, more casual gamers, those sorts of things. And where you test it as well. So when you're speaking to gamers or you're recruiting gamers, they're often super excited about the fact that they get to play this.
Oh, it's the worst feeling in the world where we'll recruit like an extra participant or two just in case of and we've had this before where someone is late or like they can't make it anymore, just because life happens,
Bitter disappointment.
But when everyone shows up and we have to be like, I'm really sorry, you are the weakest link. And they're like, can I just play the game anyways?
Yeah.
And I'm just like, no, I'm really sorry.
But it's great, and it's amazing that we're able to do it, and that people get so excited about it, which you don't see when you're testing, your energy provider's app or something like that. You don't get quite that same level of excitement as much as they would like to. So that's great, but you also have to temper that to some extent as well, right? Because what you don't want is for that to impact the feedback in a negative way to the point where they're actually overexcited and being overly positive when maybe in a more sort of typical audience might not be. So you just have to, because you really want to make sure that your feedback is really improving the game as much as possible over time. So if you're getting people being super positive because they're just so excited and grateful to be there, then that actually means that we're not getting the data that we want, and that doesn't help anyone.
And that's why that pre-work, that introduction is really important, saying not telling them necessarily okay, this is the only thing we want feedback on, or we want to hear this, but it's here's the game, some things that you might experience, and and there might be some parts of it, the voice acting isn't totally there, the graphics are still kind of work in progress. So we don't necessarily need feedback on that, but really what we're looking for is feedback that's going to help make the game the best that it can be, and to not worry about hurting anyone's feelings, and that's why it helps, with kind of us being there because we're totally neutral, and we don't, we are contracted by a game studio to do research, but we are still a third party, and thus I think that puts some participants at ease that we're being asked to help, and that there's just a little bit of distance, so that when they're providing that feedback, they don't feel oh God, I'm speaking to the head of development at some huge studio or whatever. How could I possibly know more than this person? Yeah. It's well, actually, you're the player, and and we're going to help you articulate that feeling, or what your thoughts are.
And there's power in being the first. You experiencing a game fresh. The gaming executive won't, right? Because the gaming developers or the executives have been living and breathing that game for maybe a year or two or whatever it is, and so they know all of the intricacies of it. Whereas someone who's coming fresh to it, that's what you really want, right? Because that's the actual experience people are going to be having when they first play that game. And so there's a lot of power in not knowing all of that background information that we really want. That's what we want to kind of understand.
That actually brings up a really interesting point, because, and I mean, not that it's necessarily good or bad to run playtesting this way, but a lot of teams, in games test, and also, across all sorts of companies. Inevitably you run tests internally, and that might help like catch like big bugs or things like that. And like QA is like invaluable to making like functioning smooth games that like run super well. But at the end of the day, they are experts in their game, and the way that they play is going to be just markedly different than how someone that's like newly recruited, even like a friend or a family or like a distant friend, like a friend of a friend, can just really bring new perspectives and are going to play in a way that's like totally unexpected and maybe mildly frustrating, but like also like that's the way that games are going to be played and experienced.
It's super important to be able to appeal to everyone on that side of things. And I think again, I'm not a developer, so I don't know the mindset, but I suspect to some extent when when any kind of crafts person is creating something, they probably have a person in mind that they're creating it for, right? And I would have thought in games there's probably a lot of I have a very specific type of person who loves this type of game and used to playing this type of game. And that's great, and if it appeals to that person, fantastic. But you're not ever going to expand to other new audiences and have that game picked up by other audiences if you don't consider their needs and their interests and make sure that they're understanding of what's going on. They don't need all this background, convention and knowledge from the genre before they can pick up the game and understand it and play it.
Yeah.
So just making sure that there's room for that new audiences to join is important.
Yeah, and I like that, like making room for it. It's not that necessarily, again, very similar to other development cycles. You don't need to test every little thing all of the time because that will slow things down. And you are, because that will slow things down. And you are, you've been hired to make this game and work on this for a reason. You have a set of skills. You have a set of skills. You are hired for your expertise and bring with you a wealth of personal experiences and better experiences you've brought from making previous games, and that what user research does and games research is that it augments that and just helps to validate the decisions, like the grander kind of like game design pillars, for example, to make sure this should be challenging, but it should be challenging in that way, or if that is fun, like do we have room, do we have scope to change things around, like yes, no, maybe, like how do we integrate that into like the core game loop that doesn't totally add like another year or two to like our development cycle, but
that balance again.
Like really what games research, like the role that it plays, from my point of view, is that it is there to help you make evidence-based decisions about your game design. Whether if that's the actual mechanics, narrative, level design, etc. We've been called in to like settle a debate about a very specific thing, that like teams have been, warring about might be but
having active debates about
exactly, like debating about like this very specific, like do we include this, and it's like, well, let's see what players think, and then it's not necessarily telling them like you should include this or you will fail. It's like, well, this is what players experienced and the goals that they were trying to achieve, and this is how like it could help them, or perhaps there are other elements of the game that can support achieving those goals that would also feel like equally satisfying.
That's it, and I think you're right with that kind of that whole kind of point about settling internal debates. Ultimately, the game is the vision of the creative director or the ultimate designer of the game or the team, and we're not in any way changing that or impacting that at all. That vision is set and that's always going to be there. It's more just those kind of bits of actually we're getting some feedback that says they're not enjoying this bit. So, we might not even, necessarily be telling the team what they should be doing. It could just be a kind of, maybe it's a recommendation, but maybe we just go, look, that's what we're hearing. You guys, you can then go off and kind of come up with the best solution because that's your specific skill set.
And offering that interpretation of being like, this is what, seeing, this is what we're hearing, and this is why it matters. This is how it impacts the overall experience.
Yeah.
And, and why, and how that's like important.
Yes. Yes. It's really, just to kind of get that kind of across and try and really give the team the mindset and that sort of level of empathy of the player as much as possible, so that they can kind of maybe adapt and change their vision when they're designing for that one player that they're thinking of. Maybe kind of expanding that vision or changing it and shifting it slightly so that they're able to make sure that there's these other people that they can think of as they're playing it.
Yeah. I mean, that empathy building that you just brought up, it's really crucial as well because, as, experts and people who are working on the game, they are bringing their own, experiences into game development and design. And you may have a diverse team, but it's still like the thought of the studio, being able to bring in players who have different life experiences or are able to connect to, to the character in different ways, or, there might be a narrative that the game may have that's like really actually spoken to someone, or would feel like, actually I would be so much more engaged, if this character, acted in this way. And, so things like that, getting feedback from other sources can really help, bring life and color and connection between the studio and the player.
And I agree. And I think that's a big part of what research is about, whether it's for gaming or for anything else. It's about connecting the people that are building the thing with the people that are ultimately going to be using that thing. And we can be that conduit. I think that's fantastic. And it's a feedback loop, right? It's kind of it's providing something to the player or the customer. And they're providing you back with a way to kind of make that thing better or easier to use and more likely to be adopted and played, which is what everyone wants. So, and enjoyed.
Yeah.
Ultimately, right? Which is really important. And you asked me a question earlier about differences between the gaming world and kind of other forms of user research. And I think the other big thing is the secrecy part of it. And that's massive, and that is why a lot of what we've been talking about today is actually about in-person testing, right? Because doing stuff remotely when confidentiality is so important often it just isn't feasible. So you have to bring people into the building, which is why we have our lovely labs here in Covent Garden, and you are. People walking into the front door and we're taking their phones away from them in a nice way.
Give me that.
We don't snatch.
No.
But yeah, we literally make sure there's no recording devices or anything.
Yeah.
So sometimes it depends on the client on exactly how confidential things need to be. Maybe even drawing blinds down on the windows and those sorts of things. Really making sure that confidentiality of the game is upheld as much as possible, and getting people to sign NDAs and threatening them with removing their firstborn if they tweet anything.
Threatening, strongly suggesting.
Exactly. So it's all part of it. So that is a really big difference. I mean, obviously it does happen sometimes in non-game research, but far and away in games research, that's a big part of what we have to consider, and making sure that even sometimes the team that are working on research is as sort of small and confined as possible, depending on what the client needs.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of something that we all kind of jointly believe, that we want to make sure that the client feels comfortable and that we're all taking this like, it's just a game. It's like, no, actually this is like a really important piece that everyone is like investing blood, sweat, and tears into, and can have really like quite damaging repercussions if something were to leak or something like that. And it is something that we experience sometimes with I've definitely run something where we've had to draw the blinds, and it was like a very early prototype, so everything was like, I mean, we always have NDAs for all our projects, but like some are just really like, but really though, it needs to be so like tight-lipped. But and in games, like we really respect that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, often it would be a lot easier to run stuff remotely, right? To be able to do it because you have to get people to come into our offices, and people can just do things from home. We could probably test more often, those sorts of things. But there's a whole host of very, very good reasons why that's not possible.
And I mean, that's not to say that it's not feasible.
No,
That's definitely something that and we've run remote research in the past with other very sensitive things, but there are just extra steps that need to be taken.
Precautions. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm just wondering, as we're kind of like heading towards time, we were talking a little bit about, different ways of like running games research, and talking about like empathy building and recruitment and kickoff meetings. Like, what are the kind of like skill, like if, we had someone in the room who was thinking about like starting up like a games research team in their studio, or maybe like they're a very small team and want to, are like a person of one. Like, what kinds of skill sets would you say are like really crucial, like to develop when you're first kind of like becoming a researcher, implementing research in your studio?
Good question. I think, it probably makes a difference depending on the size of the team and the resources available to you. I think. Let's
break it up into two. Let's say like 15 or smaller.
Yeah, so I think probably if it's that sort of size, then you've really got to be resourceful. That's absolutely key. And creative with how you kind of approach things. So I think all of what we've been talked about still applies. Understanding objectives and kind of designing it according to that. But I think like the way that you recruit people. We tend to use a recruitment agency, but maybe there are kind of other ways that you can do it through kind of friends and family, or connections, or maybe there are kind of surveys you can put online at no cost. And I guess if it's a small team, budget might be an issue as well. So you need to sort of think about their cost base of doing things. Discord, is possibly a good way to recruit people as well. So just being resourceful and sort of thinking out of the box a little bit, I think, on how to record things. And I mean, our setups as well tend to be quite. We've got a guy here who's Mike, who's amazing at being able to put these very intricate, very technical solutions together that allows us to record the screen, we can record the face of the person, we record the controller and see all the intricate movements that are happening on the controller, as well as where their hands are on the controller, which is amazing and fantastic, but it's not strictly necessary to just do testing at the very basic of levels and get good feedback still. So I think there are lots of kind of great tools out there at the moment, I think, online that allow you to do very similar things for not much cost. It just takes a bit of an investment of time to be able to figure it out and work it out. So I think if you've got some time to be able to do that, and some resourceful people, that's kind of, I guess, for that kind of small team, what you really need to be able to do. And just be ready to adopt different roles, I think, when you're doing that sort of stuff. You've got to be the user researcher, plus the technician.
Yeah, plus maybe the community manager as well. That's another really great way. Yeah.
Of the participants and all those sorts of things. So you've got to put on lots of different hats and be ready to do that. So I think that's more. But I think, all of the technicalities and logistics of it to one side. Empathy has got to be number one, right? It's about understanding and having an interest in how people think, which is really, really key and core to everything that we're doing. It's kind of, let's see, how is someone reacting to that thing? Why are they reacting to that thing? I really want to and maybe not even just accepting, if you're interviewing them, not accepting the first answer, or at least not just assuming that that's the be all and end all of it, but asking, okay, tell me more about that. Ask me, let's talk about the 5 whys, where we'll ask why do you do that? Okay, now tell me why that and why you go deep in once you're 5 levels down, maybe you're closer to actually what is the core reason for why they did that, and you can start to understand things. And the minute you understand the kind of the core motivator behind a behaviour, you're in a really good position then to design something that works really well for that audience.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Having that, just that curiosity that like can't be sated by a single answer, I think is a really important skill for a researcher to have, and those kinds of skills to be able to plan and ask the right questions, and again, like sticking to the plan, but also having that kind of like sixth sense that's like there's something here, and I think we're going to go down that road for a little bit, because it's all well and good to have a script, but we like to say that we run semi-structured interviews where if we find something that's like maybe going off the script a little bit, or is going to meander back to the objectives, but just might require like a little more digging, then we're have that instinct to go down that route. I mean, I say instinct. This is something that's built over time. It's not something that we're all born with. And it's not necessary as well to having a degree in cognitive science or psychology or human-computer interaction is important and helpful, but it's not the end-all be-all. I think the great thing about research is if you have a curiosity and know how to talk to people, then you're already halfway there.
Well, I mean, your background in social research. I mean,
right? Yeah. I mean, I used to be a social worker for children, and I mean, a lot of that was learning like empathy building and having difficult conversations and learning about human behavior and systems as well. Again, like we were talking about those contexts, like everyone exists within like their contexts and concentric circles of family history, school history, community, et cetera, and looking at that like macro perspective of someone is using an app, but in what context are they using that? They're playing a game. What context? What identities are they bringing with them? And it's all relevant. All goes into running better interviews and asking those questions that are going to help get the results that that you need.
Yeah, and I mean, without going too deep and philosophical, but when you think about it, I mean, literally all games are built around a person, a player, right? That ultimately that's what it's built around. So it's such an important part of it, and it's about the story, and you're telling a story to someone. It's interactive, so you're having interaction with that person as well. So there's so much effort and time that's invested in developing the game. There needs to be a good amount of time, if not equal amount of time, invested in understanding the person who's playing it as well and how they think. And game developers are amazing at having so much experience and intuition in terms of what works and what won't work for certain players. But I think sometimes you do also need that kind of sense check of, okay, let's just double check that what my intuition is telling me is correct, and that I'm actually doing this. I'm going down the right route. I'm not spending 6 months developing something which turns out to be a dud.
Yeah. And what about like larger studios, like thinking like teams of over 100 or 1,000? Like, what kind of advice would you have for?
I mean, I think they tend to have a different problem. They tend to suffer from having too much resource and too much data often. So what will often happen is that those teams will have an in-house team, and they'll have labs, and they'll be doing stuff day in, day out, with tons and tons of different teams and tons of, often maybe working on different games or perhaps different parts of the same game, and doing testing all of the time, and then they're actually swamped with data. Got so much data. Like how do you do that? And they might have different. It might not just be observational data. They might also have ways of tracking, where people are dying on the map in the game and those sorts of things, and heat maps and all that kind of stuff. And they're just literally drowning in data. So, there's sort of a lot there where those sorts of teams, have to sort of figure out like how can I organise that, how can I manage it, how can I make sense of all of that data, understand what's important versus the irrelevant stuff. How can I kind of, when I report all my findings back to those teams, how can I do that in a way that makes sense to them with all of this data and sort of refine that down to kind of these key narrative points. And also, I think then also, there's a lot of stuff where those big companies also need to track those findings, and they'll often have what they call like a research repository, where they'll have a database of all of the different findings. And it's important to keep that and track that, because you can kind of learn lessons from that, and that's also a valuable resource where you can kind of pull together a bigger understanding of an audience beyond, maybe even beyond one game, across multiple games, for example. So there's lots of valuable data that they can use in that. So that's where kind of what they call research operations takes kind of an important role, where you're kind of trying to build out these repositories, and you're trying to develop ways to very quickly repeat tests in ways that are kind of easy to do time and time again, make things as efficient as possible. Efficiency becomes a big part of it as well. So they kind of have the inverse problem. It's not like I don't have enough resource and that's it, so I've got far too many. Yeah. How do I stop myself kind of, getting buried under all of this stuff?
Yeah, there's always a rabbit hole, that's like, that's interesting, oh that's interesting, oh that's interesting. And you can keep going down that rabbit hole of what's interesting. But again, and this applies to everyone, it's like going back to like, what are the business goals, or what's the goal of the game?
Yeah.
What's the vision? What problem are we trying to solve for? But yeah, I could definitely, from what we've seen from like bigger teams as well, traditionally we come in because we're able to very I don't know if surgically is the right word, but we're very focused on, making sure that there are very clear objectives, and that we're delivering something that is going to be relate to that and be actionable, and then help kind of foster that kind of environment, or that thought kind of process of, to make it so that, yes, something is interesting, and here's why it's important.
Yeah, here's the context behind that, so you can fully understand the importance of it and the meaning of it, and maybe that one thing impacts several other parts of the game as well, and they can then make those connections if they understand that more fully. I think you're absolutely right, and while you were talking, I keep going back to that earlier point about the difference between game testing and other types of testing, and I think speed is actually a really important part of it as well. And oftentimes gaming clients, the speed of development of games is like nothing else, and it's absolutely immense. So the rate that we have to kind of recruit people, run the test, feedback stuff is really, really important. So oftentimes it's much more of a focus on us returning the results, the day after we've run the play test, whereas with other clients it might be a week later, and they're happy for us to spend some time crafting a report and a narrative around it, and kind of going deep into the analysis and those sorts of things. With play testing, it tends to be very quick. So they may still want that report and that deeper level analysis, but they also want something that they can do. That week, they're also developing out that feature, and they want to kind of get.
Even when they're watching the playtest, they have the two screens. They have the developers are watching the playtest, but they're still coding. They're still working. Everyone is still running.
Yeah,
so,
go.
Yeah, getting those results in them as soon as possible. Even if they're early, it still frees up that time, and the blockers that so that teams are able to move ahead.
Yeah, and I think that's another reason why game testing is actually so enjoyable as well, because of that pace of development is so fast. You get to see the results of the work that we've been doing much sooner as well, because a month down the line you're like, okay, how are you guys doing? Oh, we've done this and this and this, and you're like, oh my god, it's completely changed. And maybe the whole kind of direction of a particular mechanic has completely been altered, and it's great to see that, and then you're excited to then test how that works, right? Is that doing now what we expected it to do? It's actually that kind of joy of discovery and finding out, whether things are working out as you expect them to. It's that kind of the joy of innovation, I guess.
Yay! Mark, thank you so much for being interviewed here today, and I had so much fun.
Yeah, that's been great. It's felt much less like an interview and more just like a lovely conversation. So it's been great.
And I'm sure there's so much more that we could talk about, and if you guys want us to talk about anything else related to UX research, or what it's like playing on a Spectrum or getting a PhD in GoldenEye.
Yeah, I can think back to my days of playing Double Dragon and all those sorts of things, and happy to go on all day like that.
Yeah, let us know. Thanks.
Thank you.